Welcome back. This is our third and last video for acrylic. We are going to go back to this one with tissue paper, Graffito, and loaded paintbrush, and then our gradient, our wash, and our dry brush. So we're going to go back to these things now that they are dry. So you should have a palette. I got a couple different colors. You can use the same colors. Doesn't really matter. And of course I have a paintbrush. I just have one this time, my water, and my paper towel. So this is really, all of those things that we need all of the time. I did go back and add another layer of my gesso to my tissue paper. It didn't cover as well as I would have liked it to. It really bled. But because we're doing practice, it's not a big deal. So the main thing with the tissue paper is that it's creating this texture for us. So we can see these little ins and out, these little crevices. And it can get we can get a really cool effect with that. So if you just wanted to take like just a regular color and go on top, then when we cover this up, we can see all those little layers. This is great for backgrounds. It's great for different kind of textures, maybe on food or mountains, but just adding a solid color on top here, you can see how we can see some of that. I'll bring it up a little bit. We can see some of that texture on there. Oh, look at it. Sort of looks like a face. Did not mean to do that. But we can see that in there. And when we add different types of colors, like on here, when we come in here and we add different layers of colors and we mix them on here, we can get some really cool blended gradient effects depending on what you would like for your piece. So this is just a really great tool to have and to use. You can also use something called modeling paste to make something like this, but with tissue paper, you can sometimes like sort of get what you want. I guess tissue paper, no, let me back up. Tissue paper is going to sort of do what it wants. Modeling paste is going to give you more of like, you can sort of control it a little bit more. You can really build it up off of the page. So here's our, I just sort of put red and yellow down and it made an orange, but you can see all those beautiful textures in there. I am not going to wash my paintbrush out for this next one. We're going to go to Graffito, and I'm going to just put a layer of red on top. So this one's a fun one, and you don't necessarily use it for all of the things. It can be really fun to use. So you put a nice layer of your color on top of what you've already had. You can take a pencil, take the back of the brush, which is what I'm going to do. There we go. You can also take a fork, whatever, any kind of cool textural things. And Graffito is when you come in here and you take the paint away. So this can be really cool for some areas of where you really want some highlight on there. So you can see, I'll bring it up a little bit closer. You can see all that blue peeking through and nice, clean, smooth lines because I'm going over it. So on washes, I'm going to wash my paintbrush out real quick. With this bottom one, we did like a nice little gradient. So again, I don't know if you guys ever did that when you were younger where you put a bunch of color on and then you either painted it over in black or you used crayon and then you were able to scratch through. This is what this reminds me of. So this is like the official version, right? But if you put white on top, because the red sort of blends, but if you put white on top, you're going to be able to see through really easily, right? And then you'll have, and my gradient wasn't very strong on the bottom here. I can even use the other part of my paintbrush to make thicker lines instead of just the edge of it. If my gradient was a little bit stronger, as meaning like it went from a dark to a really light, you would be able to see the transition underneath. You can barely see it on the video, but with my eye, I can see it a little bit. If I were to have more of a gradient on there, it would you would definitely be able to see that. So that's just a really cool technique to sort of just have in your pocket, maybe for like grass or different like eyelashes potentially, or something along those lines. You know, there's so many different ways we can use this. You could potentially even just take paint on the end of your paintbrush here and use that as something to apply paint with. We don't necessarily always have to use paintbrushes. All right, so we're going to set this off to the side. And I just wanted to come back to wash and dry brush real quick. So I'm going to do a dry brush when this is all dry. So before we had that color sort of really blend in, and now I need to actually make sure my brush has not a lot of water in it because I just washed it. So make sure, you squeeze out all the water of your brush and then come in here with a little bit of paint on your brush. Take it and wipe it off, right? And then come in here and dry brush. Ooh, it looks like I've got water on my brush. You can tell because you can't see much of the, oh yeah. Sorry, I'm just squeezing more out. So sometimes that happens. Sometimes you're like, oh, I totally got it all out. And then it doesn't happen, right? So I'm just going to reapply some paint and come back in here. That's a little bit better. But with this, when it's a little less wet, when the background's less wet, I can get some really beautiful textures in there that I can't necessarily get when it's wet because it wants to blend. Oh yeah, look at that. So yeah, look at this. Here, I'll bring it up. Let it focus for a second. So look at these textures right here. Really nice and beautiful and really precise, I want to say. Whereas the ones over here are more blended, right? So there are, even if we look up here, you can see the difference around the edge here, over here too, of that dry brushing when it's wet versus dry brushing when it's all the way dry. So when we have a wash, we typically want to come back on top of it and do something. So you can even apply, and I'm going to apply a red wash. So again, remember we're getting lots of water in here. You can even come back and say, ooh, I want another wash on top. And that can really help sort of add some more depth to it. You can even come in here and blend that wash out. So all I did was take my paintbrush and wash off the red and get that on there. So hopefully you guys can see the difference between the red here. And if I wanted it more, I can just come back into my wash here and add a little bit more red there. That's a little bit more noticeable. You can see that on there. See that red? I don't know. It keeps zooming in and out. I'm sorry. I can't focus. But you can see just adding another wash on there is really, really nice to add a little bit more depth. A wash is always really great to come back in without water and just paint on your brush and come in here and add, your details on top. Because you'll have this really nice, beautiful background. So that's sort of a poor excuse for a flower there, but we get the idea. So that is that concludes our acrylic techniques here. So we have our gradients, our wash, and our dry brushing. Then we get to have our tissue paper, our Graffito, and our loaded paintbrush. So these are all just tools you can keep in your back pocket and use when you get to your final.